The telegraph arrived on a Tuesday morning in June of 1866, and Eleanor Whitmore's scream echoed through every corner of the boarding house where she worked, bringing the widow Mrs. Patterson running with flour still dusting her apron and fear written across her weathered face. Eleanor stood in the narrow hallway clutching the telegram in both hands, her face drained of all color, her chest heaving with sobs that seemed to tear from somewhere deep inside her. Mrs. Patterson took the paper from her trembling fingers and read the words that would change everything. Sergeant Thomas Whitmore, killed in action during the final days of the war, buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in Virginia. The news had taken more than a year to reach his young wife in Wichita, Kansas, lost in the chaos of a nation trying to piece itself back together. The entire town rallied around Eleanor in her grief. She was only 22 years old, married barely 3 years, and now a widow before she had truly begun her life. The ladies from the church brought casseroles and pies. The men tipped their hats with solemn respect when they passed her on the dusty streets. Mrs. Patterson gave her a week away from her duties at the boarding house, though Eleanor returned after only 3 days, saying she needed the work to keep her mind from dark places. What no one knew, what Eleanor carried like a stone in her chest, was that the telegram had been a lie. Not the official telegram itself, but everything it represented. Thomas Whitmore had not died a hero's death on some distant battlefield. He had not died at all. He had simply decided that the life he left behind in Kansas, the young wife he had married in a moment of wartime urgency, was not the life he wanted anymore. The telegram had been his way of cutting ties, of becoming a ghost so he could start over somewhere else with someone else. Eleanor had discovered the truth 3 months after receiving the news, through a letter that had arrived by mistake, meant for Thomas's brother in Missouri. In it, Thomas wrote about his new life in California, about the woman he planned to marry, about his relief at being free. The betrayal had nearly destroyed her. But Eleanor was a survivor, the daughter of immigrants who had clawed their way across an ocean and half a continent to make a life in this hard land. She made a choice that night, sitting alone in her tiny room at the boarding house, the letter burning in the fireplace until nothing remained but ash. She would let Thomas Whitmore stay dead. She would wear her widow's weeds and accept the sympathy of her neighbors and build a new life from the ruins of her old one. It was easier than admitting the truth, easier than facing the pity that would come from being abandoned rather than bereaved. Months passed, and Eleanor settled into her new identity. The black dresses gave way to gray, then to muted colors. She saved her wages and began to dream of opening a small shop, maybe selling fabric and notions to the women of Wichita. Life moved forward as it always did, and if Eleanor sometimes woke in the night with her heart racing and shame burning in her throat, well, that was a burden she had chosen to carry alone. The cowboy rode into town on a blazing afternoon in late August, when the heat shimmered off the main street and made the buildings waver like mirages. His name was Daniel Garrett, though he introduced himself simply as Daniel when he arrived at the boarding house looking for a room. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. His hands were calloused from rope and leather, his face weathered by sun and wind, and when he smiled at Mrs. Patterson, it was with a warmth that made the old woman's face soften despite her usual stern demeanor. Eleanor was setting the table for supper when Daniel first walked into the dining room. She looked up from arranging the silverware and found herself meeting his gaze across the space. For a moment, neither of them moved. There was something in his expression, an openness and curiosity that made her breath catch. Then Mrs. Patterson bustled in behind him, and the moment broke. "Eleanor, "This is our new boarder, Mr. Daniel Garrett. He will be staying with us for a while." "Daniel, this is Mrs. Whitmore, one of our finest residents and my right hand in running this establishment." Daniel removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Madam, pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Garrett." Eleanor's voice was steady, her expression neutral. She had learned to guard herself carefully these past months. He took his meals with the other boarders, a rotating cast of travelers and workers passing through Wichita on their way to somewhere else. But Daniel did not seem to be passing through. He took a job at the stockyards, working with the cattle that came through on their way to market. He was good with animals, patient and steady, and within a week he had impressed his employers enough to earn a permanent position. Eleanor tried not to notice him, tried not to feel the way her pulse quickened when he walked into a room. She told herself it was too soon, that she was meant to be in mourning, that entertaining such thoughts was a betrayal of the memory she had created. But Daniel made it difficult. He was kind without being overbearing, helpful without expecting praise. He fixed the loose step on the back porch without being asked. He carried heavy loads for Mrs. Patterson when he saw her struggling. And he spoke to Eleanor as though she were a person, not just a tragic figure to be pitied. One evening in early September, as the heat finally began to break and the first cool breezes whispered promises of autumn, Eleanor was hanging laundry in the backyard when Daniel came around the corner carrying a basket of his own washing. "Evening's the best time for this," he said conversationally, beginning to hang his shirts on the line. "Too hot during the day, and the morning dew makes everything take twice as long to dry." Eleanor nodded, pinning one of Mrs. Patterson's sheets in place. "You learn these things when you have been doing laundry as long as I have." "How long is that?" He asked it casually, but she could feel him watching her. "Since I was old enough to reach the washtub. My mother believed in useful children." He laughed, a warm sound that made something inside her chest loosen. "Mine too. I could muck a stall before I could write my own name." They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Eleanor felt herself relaxing in a way she had not allowed in months, letting down some small part of the wall she kept between herself and the world. "Mrs. Patterson tells me you are hoping to open a shop someday," Daniel said, hanging the last of his clothes. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised. "She talks about me, only good things. She thinks very highly of you." He picked up his empty basket, turning to face her fully. "I think it is a fine dream. This town could use more businesses run by smart people. You think I am smart and you barely know me." But there was no edge to her words, only curiosity. "I am a good judge of character." His eyes met hers, serious now. "And I can see you are someone who has survived hard things and come through stronger." The words hit her with unexpected force, and she had to look away, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. "Thank you," she managed. After that evening, something shifted between them. It was subtle at first, small conversations that stretched longer, glances that lingered. Daniel began finding excuses to be wherever Eleanor was working, offering to help with tasks that did not really require two people. Eleanor found herself listening for his footsteps, noting when he came and went, feeling disappointed on the evenings when he worked late and missed supper. Mrs. Patterson noticed, of course. Nothing happened in her boarding house without her knowledge. One afternoon in late September, she pulled Eleanor aside in the kitchen. "That young man is sweet on you," she said without preamble, her hands busy kneading bread dough. Eleanor felt her face flush. "Mrs. Patterson, I do not know what you mean. Do not play coy with me, girl. I have eyes. And I think you might be sweet on him too, though you are fighting it. It has barely been 8 months since I received word about Thomas." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper, guilt washing over her in a familiar wave. Mrs. Patterson stopped kneading and looked at her with surprising gentleness. "Eleanor, you are a young woman with your whole life ahead of you. Thomas would not want you to mourn forever. He would want you to find happiness again. If only you knew," Eleanor thought, but she kept her expression neutral. "It feels too soon. There is no right timeline for grief, and there is no shame in opening your heart to the possibility of joy, Mrs. Patterson returned to her dough, her tone becoming more practical. "Besides, Daniel Garrett is a good man. Those are not so easy to find, especially out here. If he is offering you something real, you would be a fool to turn it away just because of what people might think." Eleanor carried those words with her through the following weeks as autumn settled over Kansas in earnest. The air turned crisp. The leaves on the few trees lining Main Street faded to gold and brown, and the rhythm of life in Wichita shifted with the seasons. Daniel continued his steady presence in her life, and despite her reservations, Eleanor found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the way he made her laugh, to the feeling of being seen as herself rather than as a tragic figure. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel found her on the boarding house porch, mending a tear in one of the curtains. He leaned against the railing, his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "There is a dance next Friday," he said, "at the community hall. I was wondering if you might consider attending with me." Eleanor's hands stilled on the fabric. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Daniel, I do not know if that would be appropriate. People would talk. Let them talk." His voice was soft but firm. "Eleanor, I know you are worried about appearances, about what is proper, but life is too short and too uncertain to let fear make our decisions for us. I care about you. I would like the opportunity to spend an evening in your company, to dance with you, to make you smile. If you do not want that, if you do not share my feelings, then tell me and I will accept it. But if it is only propriety holding you back, then I am asking you to be brave." She looked up at him, at the hope and vulnerability in his face, and felt something crack open inside her chest. All her carefully constructed defenses, all her determination to keep everyone at a distance, suddenly seemed impossibly heavy and completely pointless. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I would like to go to the dance with you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Eleanor borrowed a dress from one of the other boarders, a soft blue cotton that had not been dyed black for mourning. Mrs. Patterson helped her arrange her honey-colored hair in a style more elaborate than her usual simple bun. When Eleanor looked at herself in the small mirror in her room, she barely recognized the woman looking back. There was color in her cheeks, brightness in her hazel eyes. She looked alive in a way she had not in more than a year. Daniel was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when she came down, and the expression on his face when he saw her made her feel beautiful in a way she had forgotten was possible. "You look stunning," he said quietly, offering his arm. The walk to the community hall took only 10 minutes, but Eleanor felt as though she were crossing some vast threshold, leaving one version of herself behind and stepping into something new and uncertain. The hall was already crowded when they arrived, lit by lanterns that cast warm, golden light over the assembled dancers. A small group of musicians occupied one corner, fiddles and guitars creating lively music that had people clapping and stomping in time. At first, Eleanor was hyper-aware of the eyes on them, the whispers that followed in their wake. "Widow Whitmore, dancing already. Is it not too soon?" But then Daniel took her hand and led her onto the floor, and the rest of the world faded away. He was a good dancer, confident and sure, guiding her through the steps with an ease that made her feel graceful. They spun and swayed, and Eleanor found herself laughing, genuine joy bubbling up from somewhere she thought had gone dry. Between dances, they stepped outside for air, standing in the cool evening under a sky brilliant with stars. The music drifted through the open doors, softer now, a slow waltz that tugged at Eleanor's heart. "Thank you for tonight," she said, looking up at him. "I have not felt this happy in longer than I can remember." "You deserve to be happy, Eleanor." Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair back from her face with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "You deserve all the good things this world can offer." She wanted to tell him the truth then, wanted to unburden herself of the secret she carried. But fear held her tongue. What if he thought less of her? What if he saw her as a liar, someone who had deceived the entire town? What if this fragile, precious thing growing between them shattered under the weight of her confession? "Daniel," she began, but he shook his head. "You do not have to say anything. I just want you to know that I am here and I am not going anywhere." He kissed her then, soft and careful, a question and a promise all at once. Eleanor melted into it, letting herself have this moment of pure feeling without thought or fear. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, she rested her forehead against his chest and let him hold her while the stars wheeled overhead and the music played on. The following weeks brought a shift in their relationship that everyone could see. Daniel and Eleanor were courting, properly and openly. And though some of the older women in town clucked their tongues about the timing, most people seemed pleased to see the young widow finding happiness again. Daniel was a regular fixture at the boarding house now, taking his meals with an easy familiarity, helping with repairs and odd jobs, becoming part of the fabric of daily life there. October brought crisp mornings, and the smell of wood smoke in the air. Eleanor continued saving her wages, her dream of opening a shop growing more concrete with each passing week. Daniel encouraged her, helped her sketch out plans and consider locations. They spent hours talking about the future, weaving their individual dreams into something shared. But the past has a way of catching up with us, no matter how fast we run. It was a cold morning in early November when Daniel came back from the general store carrying supplies for Mrs. Patterson, his expression troubled. Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing vegetables for the evening meal, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her knife. Daniel glanced around, making sure they were alone, then pulled a newspaper from inside his jacket. It was not the local Wichita paper, but something from California, weeks old and travel-worn. "I was at the store, and Mr. Henderson had a stack of old newspapers he was using for wrapping. This one caught my eye." He spread it on the table, pointing to a small notice in the announcement section. Eleanor's vision swam as she read the words. Thomas Whitmore of Sacramento married Miss Laura Hendricks in a ceremony attended by family and friends. The couple plans to remain in California, where Mr. Whitmore has established a successful freight business. The room tilted. Eleanor grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles white. This was it, the secret she had guarded so carefully, exposed in black and white newsprint. "Eleanor." Daniel's voice was gentle, careful. "Your husband. He is supposed to be dead." The words came out strangled, barely above a whisper. "But he is not." She could not look at him, could not bear to see the judgment or disgust or pity in his eyes. "No, he is not." The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor waited for him to walk away, to denounce her, to tell everyone that she was a fraud and a liar. But instead, she felt his hand cover hers on the table, warm and steady. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me what happened." And so she did. The words poured out of her in a rush. The whole sorry tale of Thomas's desertion, the false telegram, the letter that had revealed the truth. her decision to maintain the lie rather than face the shame of abandonment. She told him everything, her voice shaking, tears streaming down her face, certain that with every word she was destroying the best thing that had happened to her in years. When she finally fell silent, exhausted and empty, Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand. "Look at me, Eleanor." She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting to see disappointment or anger. Instead, she saw understanding. "What he did to you was cruel and cowardly," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. I do not blame you for that. I do not think less of you for it. You do not." She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "No." He moved closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb wiping away her tears. "If anything, I am amazed by your strength. You could have let this destroy you, but instead you built a new life. That takes courage. But I lied to everyone. The whole town thinks I am a widow. And you are, in every way that matters. He left you. He let you believe he was dead. He made his choice and you made yours." Daniel's eyes searched her face. "The question is, what do you want to do now?" Eleanor had not let herself think that far ahead. "I do not know. If people find out the truth, they will judge me. They might run me out of town. Or," Daniel said slowly, "we could keep your secret, together." She stared at him. "You would do that. You would help me maintain the lie." "It is not a lie anymore, Eleanor. Thomas Whitmore is dead to you and to everyone here. What he does in California is his business. What we do here is ours." He took both her hands now, his grip firm and reassuring. "I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you since that first evening when we hung laundry together, and you looked at me like I was a real person and not just another drifter passing through. I do not care about your past or about what some people might think. I care about you, about the woman you are right now, about the future we could build together. You love me." The words were barely a whisper. "With everything I am." He smiled then, that warm, genuine smile that had first begun to thaw her frozen heart. "And if keeping this secret means you are safe and happy, then that is what I will do. I will guard your truth as carefully as you have, and no one will ever know unless you decide to tell them." Eleanor felt something break loose inside her, some last barrier of fear and shame crumbling under the weight of his acceptance. She threw her arms around him, holding on tight while sobs shook her body, but these were different tears, tears of relief and gratitude and something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I love you too," she said into his shoulder. "I did not think I could ever trust anyone again, but I trust you. I love you." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the warm kitchen while the afternoon light slanted through the windows, and the world continued on outside, oblivious to the secret they now shared. That evening, Daniel built a fire in the stove in his room and they burned the newspaper, watching the pages curl and blacken until Thomas Whitmore's name was nothing but ash. It felt like a ritual, a closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months, the burden of her secret no longer hers alone to carry. Over the following weeks, Daniel proved himself true to his word. He never faltered, never let slip any hint of what he knew. To the rest of Wichita, Eleanor remained the respectable young widow, and Daniel the steadfast cowboy who had won her heart with patience and genuine affection. They continued their courtship, and when Daniel proposed on a cold December evening, going down on one knee in Mrs. Patterson's parlor with a simple gold band, Eleanor said yes without hesitation. They were married in the spring of 1867, in the same church where Eleanor had held a memorial service for a man who was not dead. She wore a dress of cream linen, and Daniel stood beside her in his best suit, his hand steady in hers as they spoke their vows. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears in the front pew. Half the town turned out for the celebration afterward, bringing food and gifts and good wishes for the couple's future. Eleanor felt a momentary pang of guilt as she looked around at all the kind faces, these people who had supported her through what they believed was her time of grief. But then she looked at Daniel, at the love and certainty in his eyes, and she knew she had made the right choice. Thomas Whitmore had left her with nothing but pain. Daniel Garrett was giving her everything. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a modest two-room structure that Daniel set about improving immediately, adding a porch and a proper kitchen, talking about eventually building a second story when children came. Eleanor opened her shop that summer, a bright, welcoming space on Main Street where women could purchase fabric, thread, buttons, and patterns. She had a good eye for what would sell, and business was steady from the start. Life settled into a rhythm that felt solid and real. Daniel continued his work with cattle, eventually buying a small herd of his own and leasing grazing land outside town. Eleanor ran her shop during the day and came home to a husband who made her laugh, who held her at night, who looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in his world. They built a life together brick by brick, choice by choice, and if Eleanor sometimes still woke in the night with her heart racing, worried that someone would discover her secret, Daniel was always there to soothe her back to sleep. Months turned into years. Wichita continued to grow, more businesses opening along Main Street, more families settling in the area as the railroad brought increased trade and opportunity. Eleanor's shop expanded, and she hired an assistant to help with the growing customer base. Daniel's cattle business prospered, and he became known throughout the region as a fair dealer and a man of his word. They were respected members of the community, invited to social gatherings, trusted and liked by their neighbors. In the fall of 1868, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Daniel one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her into his arms, his voice thick with emotion as he whispered "thank you" against her hair over and over. They spent that evening making plans, talking about names and futures and all the ways their lives were about to change. The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Daniel hovered anxiously, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her back when she was ill, holding her when she cried from exhaustion and frustration. But as winter gave way to spring, the sickness passed and Eleanor bloomed. She had never felt more alive, more present in her own body. Daniel would rest his hand on her growing belly, marveling at every flutter and kick, talking to their unborn child about the life they would have together. Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1869, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to everyone within earshot. They named him James, after Daniel's father, and from the moment Eleanor held him, she felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening. Daniel was besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, holding him against his chest while he did chores, singing off key lullabies that made Eleanor laugh through her exhaustion. James was only 6 months old when the letter arrived. It came to the general store, addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, care of Wichita, Kansas. Mr. Henderson brought it to the shop personally, his expression curious about who would be writing to her after all this time. Eleanor took it with shaking hands, immediately recognizing the handwriting on the envelope. Thomas. She waited until she was home, until James was napping and Daniel was still out with the cattle, before she opened it. Her hands trembled so badly she almost tore the paper. The letter was short and to the point. Thomas had heard through some distant connection that Eleanor had remarried. He wanted her to know that he needed proof of his death declared officially void, so that he could establish clear legal identity for some business dealings in California. He was not threatening her, not asking for money or trying to reclaim anything. He just needed her cooperation in signing some documents that would acknowledge he was alive, and that their marriage had therefore not been legally ended by death, but by desertion. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face as she read it again, trying to process what this meant. If she signed those documents, if Thomas pursued this legally, everyone in Wichita would know the truth. Her reputation would be destroyed. The respect and trust she and Daniel had built would crumble. Her business might fail. Their son would grow up with the stigma of having a mother who had deceived an entire town. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still holding the letter, when Daniel came home. He knew immediately that something was wrong, crossing the room in 3 long strides to kneel beside her chair. "What happened?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read, saw the anger flash in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw. "He has no right," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. "He abandoned you. He let you think he was dead, and now he wants to make it public. He says he needs it for business reasons. He is not trying to hurt me, he just needs the legal clarity." Eleanor heard how defeated she sounded and hated it. "I do not care what he needs." Daniel crumpled the letter in his fist. "We have built a good life here. We have a son. I will not let him destroy that. But what choice do we have? If he pursues this legally, it will come out anyway." Daniel was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. Then his gaze sharpened, focusing on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What if we moved?" he said. "Started over somewhere new. California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere no one knows us, where we could just be ourselves without any secrets." Eleanor considered it. The thought of leaving Wichita, the life they had built here, made her heart ache. But the thought of everyone knowing the truth was worse. "And my shop, your business, we would rebuild. We have done it before, we could do it again." He took her hands, his grip warm and sure. "Eleanor, I meant what I said when I proposed. You and James, you are my life. Everything else is just details. If we need to start over to keep our family safe and whole, then that is what we will do." But Eleanor looked at her husband, at the determination and love in his face, and felt something shift inside her. For years she had been running, hiding, protecting herself with lies and half-truths. She had let fear guide her choices, let shame dictate her actions. And yes, it had worked, had given her a good life with a good man. But it had also kept her in constant anxiety, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. "No," she said slowly. "No, I am tired of running. I am tired of being afraid." Daniel looked at her in surprise. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that maybe it is time to tell the truth." The words came faster now, gathering momentum as the decision solidified in her mind. "Not the whole town, not right away, but the people who matter. Mrs. Patterson, Pastor Williams, some of our closest friends, we tell them the truth, the whole story. And we let them decide whether our past mistakes matter more than the people we have become. Eleanor, are you sure? Once you tell people, you cannot take it back. I know." She squeezed his hands. "But I am tired of living with this fear. And I hope, that the people who truly care about us will understand. Maybe not everyone. Maybe there will be some who turn away. But I would rather live with the consequences of truth than keep hiding in lies." Daniel studied her face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "If that is what you want, then I am with you. Whatever happens, we face it together." They started with Mrs. Patterson. The old woman listened to Eleanor's confession without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Eleanor finally fell silent, exhausted from the telling, Mrs. Patterson was quiet for several minutes. Then she reached across the table and patted Eleanor's hand. "Child, I have lived long enough to know that people are more complicated than their worst moments. What Thomas did was wrong. What you did afterward, maybe it was not entirely honest, but it was understandable. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how." She looked at Daniel then, something approving in her eyes. "And you have clearly found a good man who loves you for who you are. That is worth more than spotless honesty about a past that cannot be changed." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. "You do not hate me, hate you. Goodness, no. I am proud of you for surviving, for building a good life, for being brave enough now to tell the truth." Mrs. Patterson stood, pulling Eleanor into a rare embrace. "You are family to me, girl. That does not change just because some scoundrel hurt you years ago." Encouraged by Mrs. Patterson's reaction, they told Pastor Williams next. He was older, more conservative, and Eleanor genuinely feared his judgment. But he surprised her with his compassion, acknowledging that what she had done was deceptive, but understanding why she had felt it necessary. He agreed to keep the confidence, saying that it was between Eleanor, Daniel, God, and whoever else they chose to tell. Over the following weeks, they shared the truth with a handful of their closest friends. The reactions varied. Some were shocked but ultimately understanding. A few were hurt that Eleanor had not trusted them with the truth earlier. One couple, the rigidly proper Hendersons, made it clear they no longer felt comfortable associating with someone who had deceived the entire town, even if the deception had understandable roots. It stung, losing people she had considered friends. But Eleanor also felt a growing sense of freedom. The weight she had carried for so long was lighter now, shared among people who had chosen to stand by her despite knowing the worst. And the people who turned away, painful as it was, had ultimately judged her circumstances rather than her character. They decided not to make a public announcement, not to take out a notice in the newspaper, or stand up in church and confess to the entire congregation. That felt performative, like making a spectacle of pain that had already caused enough damage. Instead, they let the truth spread naturally through the quiet networks of small-town gossip. Some people were kind, others judgmental, most somewhere in between. Eleanor's shop lost a few customers, but gained others who admired her courage in being honest about her past. Daniel's business was largely unaffected. Men in the cattle trade cared more about a person's word and their skill than about old scandals. And the people who truly mattered, the ones whose opinions held weight in Eleanor and Daniel's hearts, stood by them. As for Thomas, Eleanor wrote him a brief letter through a lawyer, acknowledging that he was alive and that their marriage had ended through desertion. She signed the necessary documents, feeling nothing but relief as she mailed them away. That chapter of her life was finally, completely closed. Life moved forward as it always does. James grew from a baby into an energetic toddler, then a curious child. Eleanor and Daniel had 2 more children, a daughter they named Margaret in 1871, and another son, Robert, in 1873. The house Daniel had built expanded to accommodate their growing family, becoming a warm and welcoming home filled with laughter and love. The shop continued to thrive, eventually expanding to include a small lending library that Eleanor ran in partnership with the schoolteacher. Daniel's cattle business became one of the most successful in the region, and he eventually bought the grazing land he had been leasing, building a modest ranch that provided well for his family. There were still difficult moments, times when someone would make a cutting remark or give Eleanor a judgmental look. But those became fewer and farther between as the years passed, and people found new scandals to occupy their attention. Eleanor learned that while the truth could be painful, it was ultimately less exhausting than maintaining lies. She slept better at night, no longer starting awake in panic worried about being discovered. On their 10th wedding anniversary in the spring of 1877, Daniel took Eleanor to the same community hall where they had first danced together. The same musicians were playing, older now but still spirited. They moved across the floor just as they had that first night, and Eleanor felt the same joy, the same sense of rightness. "You ever regret it?" Daniel asked quietly as they swayed to a slow waltz. "Telling the truth, we could have just moved away, started fresh somewhere new." Eleanor looked up at him, at this man who had known her worst secrets and loved her anyway, who had stood by her through judgment and gossip and painful conversations. She thought about their children sleeping safe at home, about the life they had built together through honesty and hard work and stubborn determination. "Never," she said firmly. "Running would have been easier in the moment, but we would have carried the fear with us wherever we went. This way we are free, really free." He smiled and pulled her closer, resting his cheek against her hair as they danced. "I love you, Eleanor Garrett, every complicated, courageous, beautiful part of you, and I love you, Daniel Garrett. Thank you for being the man who kept my secret when I needed protection, and who stood beside me when I found the courage to tell the truth." The music played on, and they danced under the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, surrounded by a community that knew them fully and, for the most part, accepted them anyway. It was not a perfect life, not a fairy tale with a spotless reputation and universal approval. But it was real and honest and built on a foundation of genuine love. That, Eleanor thought as Daniel spun her across the floor, was worth more than any amount of false sympathy or carefully maintained lies. She had learned the hard way that secrets could protect you for a while, but only truth could set you free. And she had learned that the right person, the person who truly loves you, will hold your secrets when you need them kept and stand beside you when you are ready to speak them aloud. The years continued to pass, gentle and full. James grew into a serious young man who inherited his father's way with animals and his mother's head for business. Margaret was bright and curious, always reading, always asking questions that made her parents laugh and think. Robert was the adventurer, climbing trees and exploring every corner of their property, giving Eleanor gray hairs before she was 40. Daniel and Eleanor grew older together, their hair silvering, their faces etching with lines of laughter and life. They watched their children grow, helped James establish his own ranch, sent Margaret to the teachers' college in Topeka, encouraged Robert's dream of studying law. They became grandparents, marveling at the next generation, telling carefully edited stories about the old days that emphasized perseverance and love rather than deception and pain. On quiet evenings, sitting together on their porch watching the Kansas sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Eleanor would sometimes think about the frightened young woman she had been, clutching a false telegram and making desperate choices. That woman seemed like someone from a different lifetime, someone she barely recognized. The years had transformed her, shaped by hardship but also by love, by the daily choice to be honest and open despite the costs, by the steady presence of a man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to stay. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel would ask on those evenings, taking her hand in his calloused, familiar grip. "How lucky I am," Eleanor would answer truthfully. "How different my life could have been if you had not walked into Mrs. Patterson's boarding house that August afternoon." "I am the lucky one," Daniel would always reply. "You taught me that loving someone means seeing all of them, the light and the shadows, and choosing to stay anyway." They grew old together in their home in Wichita, watching the town transform from a rough frontier settlement into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. They saw the wild west of their youth fade into memory, replaced by modernity and progress. But the essential things, the things that mattered, remained constant: love, family, truth. When Daniel died peacefully in his sleep in the summer of 1904, Eleanor grieved him properly and honestly, wearing black without pretense, mourning a man who had truly been her partner in every sense. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, still sharp-minded and determined until the very end. On her last day, propped up in her bed with Margaret holding one hand and James the other, Eleanor looked around at the family she had helped create and felt a deep sense of peace. She had made mistakes, told lies born of fear and pain, but she had also found the courage to live truthfully. She had been loved fully and honestly by a good man. She had raised children who knew the value of both compassion and integrity. She had built a life of meaning and substance from the ruins of betrayal and loss. "Tell them," she whispered to her children, her voice fading. "When I am gone, if anyone asks, tell them the truth. All of it. About Thomas, about the lies, about how your father kept my secret and then helped me find the courage to speak it. Tell them that mistakes can be redeemed, that secrets can become stories, that love can transform everything." "We will, Mama," Margaret promised, tears streaming down her face. "We love you," James added, his voice breaking. Eleanor smiled, thinking of Daniel waiting for her on the other side, ready to dance under starlight again. "I know," she said softly, "and that has made all the difference." She closed her eyes then, and her breathing slowed, and the woman who had survived abandonment and built a life of truth and love drifted peacefully away, leaving behind a legacy more honest and real than any spotless reputation could ever be. In the years that followed, her grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell her story, the whole complicated truth of it. They told it not as a cautionary tale or a scandal, but as a testament to resilience and redemption. They told it as a love story, about a cowboy who found out a secret and kept it, until the woman he loved was strong enough to speak it herself. They told it as an example of how the most important truths are not about perfection, but about the courage to face our mistakes and the grace to forgive ourselves and each other. And in the telling and retelling, through generations that lived in a world Eleanor could never have imagined, the story became what it had always been at its core. A reminder that we are all more than our worst moments, that love can redeem the deepest betrayals, and that the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be fully known by another person and trust that we will be loved anyway. The small gravestone in the Wichita Cemetery, next to the larger one marking Daniel's final rest, bore a simple inscription: Eleanor Whitmore Garrett, 1844–1912. Beloved wife, mother, and friend, she lived with courage and died with grace. But those who knew the full story understood the deeper truth carved not in stone, but in the lives she had touched. Eleanor had learned that secrets kept out of fear become prisons, while truth spoken with courage become bridges. She had discovered that the right partner does not demand perfection, but offers acceptance, does not exploit vulnerability but protects it, does not force confession but makes it safe. And she had proven that a life built on honesty, even honesty that comes late and imperfectly, is stronger and truer than any constructed on carefully maintained lies. That was her legacy, more lasting than any monument, more precious than any unblemished reputation. That was the gift she gave to her children and grandchildren. The knowledge that you can survive your worst mistakes, that you can find love after betrayal, and that the courage to live truthfully is worth every cost it demands. The story of Eleanor Garrett became part of the fabric of Wichita, passed down through the years as the town itself transformed and grew. And always at the heart of the story was the cowboy who found out the truth and kept it, who loved a woman through her secrets and her confessions, who proved that real love is not about perfection, but about seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway, every single day, for all the days you are given. In the end, that is what mattered. Not the telegram that lied about a death, not the husband who abandoned her, not even the years of careful deception. What mattered was the choice Eleanor made to trust again, and the choice Daniel made to be worthy of that trust. What mattered was the life they built together, brick by honest brick, truth by difficult truth, love by steadfast love. That is the story worth telling, the story worth remembering, the story that echoes across the years with a message simple and profound, that we are all broken and flawed, all carrying secrets and scars, and that the miracle is not in hiding these things, but in finding someone who will help us carry them until we are strong enough to set them down. That is what Daniel Garrett gave Eleanor Whitmore in the summer of 1866, in a small boarding house in Wichita, Kansas, when the Wild West was still wild, and the future was still being written in choices both brave and fearful. And that is what Eleanor gave back to him. The courage to know her fully, the trust to share her darkest secrets, the gift of building a life together that was messy and complicated and absolutely real. They wrote their story together in the dusty streets of a frontier town, and it became a testament to the transforming power of love that sees clearly and chooses to stay anyway, of truth that liberates even when it costs, of two people who found each other in the aftermath of betrayal and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Their love story was not perfect or simple or without pain, but it was true, every difficult, honest moment of it, and in a world that often values appearance over substance, that made it extraordinary. Daniel and Eleanor Garrett proved that the best love stories are not the ones without complications, but the ones where two people decide that the complications are worth it, that the person standing beside them is worth fighting for, worth being honest with, worth building a life alongside no matter what secrets the past might hold or what judgments the future might bring. And so their story ends not with perfect resolution but with honest completion, with lives fully lived and love fully given, with secrets transformed into stories and mistakes redeemed by the daily choice to do better, be better, love better. That is the truest happy ending of all, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone who makes the struggle worthwhile, who keeps your secrets when you need protection and stands beside you when you find the strength to speak them, who loves you not despite your complicated history, but because of the person that history has shaped you into becoming. This is the story of Eleanor and Daniel, of truth and lies and love that redeemed them all, of a cowboy who found out a secret and kept it because that is what love demanded, and of a woman who found the courage to stop running because love made her brave enough to stand still and be known. And in the knowing and being known, in the keeping of secrets and the eventual telling of them, in the daily choice to build a life together with honesty and grace, they created something that outlasted them both, a legacy of real love, complicated and beautiful and worth every difficult step of the journey.